everyone, it's Tammy with Shabby Fabrics. I am here with the coolest project. June Tailor has done it again. We have wine totes. These are so cool and I want to show you. I know I have a bottle of wine here. I'm not going to open the wine and I'm not selling the wine. But when you get the kit, you get 3 wine totes is what it makes. And it goes in there. How cute is that to give for a gift, a hostess gift? I just think these are fun. You could also put a water bottle in here if you're carrying a water bottle. I spoke to June Tailor the other day and they said that someone, a mother was on a scooter and she needed to carry her water bottle with her. And so they put the water bottle in there and this went right over the handlebars of her scooter and away she went with her water. She thought it was the most clever thing ever. So you do get 3 and they're all different. And you can see behind me, I have this one, and I have this one over here, and that's what this kit makes. So I'm going to show you the one with the diagonal stripes because doing the stripes is a little tricky. So I'm going to set this aside. We're not going to open that wine yet, and we're going to begin. So here is the batting kit that we get when you get one of these. So you can see you've got all 3 of your wine caddies here, along with the bases are the circles. So we're just going to rough cut this out a 1/2 inch bigger than the caddy. So I'm just going to cut this center one out. All right, here we go. I'm going to use a Creative Grids ruler for this. I love these Creative Grids rulers. They have the turnaround feature and they have that perfect 1/2 inch right here. Very clever. And I can just set that black line right on this line and I know I'm cutting a 1/2 inch beyond. Here we go. Okay, so we have this cut out. Very nice. I'm going to take my backing. I'm going to layer this. Whoops, it's sticking to me here. There we go. I'm going to layer this together. Now I pre-cut this ahead of time for the pattern. And this really does stick quite well. Batting tends to stick to fabric. You can see it sticks pretty good on there. It doesn't come off. I'm going to secure this with just a few pins and then we're going to sew around it on the solid line all the way around, and I'm going to use a contrasting thread in my bobbin. The reason I'm going to do that is because at the end, after we have all of our pieces sewn on, when we trim this up, we're going to use the line that I'm sewing on the bottom. I'm going to use that as my trimming line so that I know where to trim it, because I'm going to cover the front with fabric. So I want to make sure I know where my lines are. All right. Get a few pins in this so it doesn't move around when I sew it. All right, so let's go to the sewing machine and get that stitched. All right, here we go. Get my pins out of here and let's start piecing, which I think is the fun part. We're all ready to go. We're going to save our circle, which is the bottom, for the end. So I'm just going to set that aside for right now. Okay, so I have sewn around this and I have red thread in the bottom, so you can see my outline is perfect. That's exactly what I wanted. So we're going to start now. And I have pre-cut all my fabrics ahead of time. I recommend that you do that. It's going to make assembly much faster. Okay, so we're going to start with piece 1. Piece 1 lays on here like this. I'm going to set it in the center. Okay, now piece 2 is the same fabric, and the reason we did that is so you can see here 1 and 2 is the same fabric, but then when the tote is picked up, you have a piece of the fabric here and you have a piece of the fabric here. And I like the way it divides evenly over the top. So piece 1 and 2 are the same fabric. So I want this to lay right here. So I'm going to set it on here where I want it, and then I'm going to flip it back on number 1 like this, right sides together. So you can see how this is really offset, where my end for this one is right here on the edge of this batting, and here it's really long. But I know that when I turn this and flip this over, it completely covers this space, which is what I want. So the lines on this batting are placement lines. They're not actual sewing lines. All right, so this is where I want this. And I am going to put a couple of little pins in. I'm going to put at least 1 pin in this. I don't want this to move on my trip to the sewing machine. There we go. All right, so here we go. We're going to sew a 1/4 inch down here. I'm going to start a little bit ahead of this line here. I'm going to start back here, and I'm going to end beyond this line here. All right, here we go. Okay, so let's see how we did. Let's open this up and see how that works. Perfect, that's exactly what I wanted. That completely covers that. I'm going to use a roll and press by Clover. This little tool really helps in pressing these seams. You do not want to iron these seams open. You don't want to press your seams right now. You could shrink your batting or cause it to melt or distort, and you really don't want to do that. You want to just leave it as pristine as possible on the table. All right, so let's turn this around and let's do piece 3. So piece 3, I need to make sure that I'm coming all the way down to cover this, so you can see how offset that is. There we go. Okay, so that really looks funny, doesn't it, when you put it on here like that? So I'm going to start here, sew to here, and when I turn this, it will cover all the way down to this line because I need to cover this entire space. All right, so let's stick this on there. I'm going to go ahead and put at least 1 pin in this. I don't trust it not to move. Okay, there we go. Okay, let's see how we did. Let's make sure that covers where I want it to. Yep, that is perfect. You see that? It comes exactly into that space, which is exactly what I want. I'm going to finger press that. Give this a little roll and press here. That batik fabric really does crease nicely with this tool. All right, I'm going to turn around, and I'm going to do number 4 is the same fabric. And again, I want to make sure I'm covering this. So I'm going to put it where I want it to come to and flip it over. Okay. So it's the opposite of this other side. All right, we better put a pin in there. The minute I don't pin it, you know it's going to come out off. That's Murphy's Law. Okay, let me see if I did that right. Ha, perfect. Okay, that's what I'm looking for. Right, give that a little press. Perfect. All right, so now I'm just going to continue adding 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and then we'll do the other sides. So I'm just going to go ahead and keep piecing that. All right, here we go. All right, so we have the whole thing sewn. That was fairly quick, wasn't it? Probably way quicker for you than it was for me. So now I'm going to turn this over and I'm going to take my scissors or my rotary cutter and or a combination. I like to do the curve with a scissor, the straight edge with a ruler, and I'm going to go ahead and trim this out. So I'm just going to trim just to the outside of my line here. So I'm just going to place my little ruler on here and just trim all this away just like that, nice and clean. Let's go ahead and trim this out. These are so much fun to make. I really did enjoy making these. They're just fun. I can see giving these as gifts and see just a lot of uses for these wine totes. And not just wine, water, whatever. You can do a hostess gift or a party gift. If you're going to a party, you want to take a bottle of wine. What a nice way to put it in a nice reusable bag. Okay, I like these Clover Bordeaux shears for this. They're so sharp. They're such nice scissors. Got big long blades and they just cut effortlessly through all of these layers of batting and fabric. Trim this out. And we'll be ready for our next step. There we go. All right. So now the next step is to put some binding on. Now binding, because this is a curve, is you have to do bias binding. Bias binding is cut using the 45-degree angle on your ruler. You're going to put your fabric flat, put your 45-degree angle straight across the bottom, and make a cut straight up. So that's on the bias. You're cutting bias binding. Bias binding is a little bit stretchy. And I have already folded this together, but I'm going to show you. There you go. I think you guys can see how that stretches in that overhead camera. It really does have a lot of stretch to it. Makes it nice and easy to do these curves. So let me get this binding on here. And to do this, I like to use Wonder Clips whenever I'm dealing with binding. I always seem to poke myself with pins and I come away with my arms, my wrists are bloody. It's just no fun. I'm just going to set this on here and just Wonder Clip this on. Then we'll take it to the machine and stitch it down. Then I'm going to fold it to the back. And then I'm going to show you how I top stitch my binding. You could hand stitch that on there if you wanted to. I prefer just to top stitch it. I'm going to stitch in the ditch, and you're going to be amazed at how quickly I can finish binding on a project. For me, the hand stitching always takes so long to do the binding on something like this. I'm going to go ahead and clip the other side. All right, so let's go stitch that down and we'll get it turned to the back. Okay, so we have our binding is stitched on. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to give it a press, and I'm going to press it to the other side, and then I'm going to wonder clip it, and then we're going to take it to the machine and we're going to stitch it down by machine. That way we're done with this project quickly and easily, and I'm not doing a lot of handwork, unless you like to do handwork. Handwork has never been my forte when it comes to binding. That's not something I've ever really enjoyed doing. So if I can find a quick and easy way to do binding, that's what I'm going to do. But I like to give it a good press. It puts a nice crease on that. Okay. Now we're just going to turn it to the back, and I'm going to use my Wonder Clips, and I'm going to use this flat clear side of my Wonder Clip as a measuring tool. I'm going to mark how far my binding is. Let me show you what I mean. So when I put a Wonder Clip on there, I want my binding to be exactly at the bottom of this clear foot on the back, or this clear piece on the back. All right, that way I know when I am doing my binding, as long as the binding is always at that mark, I know it's going to be nice and even on the front of my quilt or on the front of whatever I'm doing. So Wonder Clips have dual purposes. How cool is that? All right, let me show you here. There we go. Okay, so you can see all my Wonder Clips are exactly the same. My binding is nice and even and straight. And then from the front, it's all perfectly even as well, which I like. Okay, so I'll do the other side, and then we're going to go to the machine. Okay, so I'm going to stitch right here in the ditch, and I pull my binding back a little bit, and that way if you roll it back and you stitch right here in the ditch, then the binding will just naturally come back and it will hide your thread. Okay, so let me show you how to do that. Okay, so I'm just going to push with my finger, and I'm just going to run that needle right next to my binding as I go. So I'm pushing the binding with my finger over, and you can see that needle is just right next to the binding. Now you could use burgundy thread, and if you were more comfortable with that, so then you didn't have, if you hit the binding by accident, you wouldn't know. I'm going to be super careful and try not to do that here. Okay, so let's check and see how we did. And see how that binding is just coming right back on there? You can't even see my stitches. How cool is that? I love that. And then on the back, I think you can probably, let me get this in the light so you can see that a little better. You can see my stitch just runs right along there, and I use matching thread in my bobbin, so you can't even really see the stitches on the back of the binding. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and do the other side, and then we're going to finish this up. All right, so we have completed our binding. Looks great, didn't take me long, no hand stitching. I'm going to trim my binding now, even with my edges. That's why I wasn't worrying about finishing this end at all. Just go ahead and leave that a raw edge. I'm going to clip it off just like that. Perfect. All right, we're going to fold right sides together. And now I'm going to line up my binding strips right here on this edge, because I want my binding to come to a V, and I think you can see that if I turn this one to the side. You can see the V when the binding comes together right there, and that's what I want. So I'm going to line up these two strips, and I am going to stick a pin through all of this because I want it to stay there. And then I'm going to pin the other side of this. One pin here. And then let's do it again on this side. Save a little bit of time going back and forth if I pin both sides at once. There we go. And this one. Okay, so I'm going to stitch this with a 1/4 inch seam allowance on here. All right, here we go. Okay, now we're going to set this to the side, and we are going to do the bottom of the tote, which is the circle that we cut out before. Let me bring that out. So I have my circle, and I have 2 squares of fabric. So I'm going to put my circle on my fabric, on one fabric. Okay, and I'm going to sew around the lines, and then I'm going to also sew the cross in the center of it. All right, so that's just the batting and this, and I have matching thread on the bottom. So here we go. So here's what this looks like. All right, now I'm going to put this on top, and now I'm going to sew it from the other side. So now I'm going to sew it from this side, and I'm just going to follow the same stitches that I already sewed. All right. All right, so we have sewn both sides. So I have both sides are sewn. And again, I'm just going to trim this right along that edge of my stitching. I'm going to cut this out. And we are going to attach our bottom to our wine tote, and we'll be completely done. It goes pretty quick once you get it to this point. All right, there we go. There's my circle. So I want, let's take this, I'm going to press the seam open a little bit right here on this edge. You can finish these seams if you want. You can zigzag them or serge them if that's what you prefer to do. I'm not going to do that here. But if I was making a nice gift for someone, I would probably finish those edges a little bit, just to give it a little nicer finish on the inside. All right, So I'm going to place my 2 seam allowances. Let me cut that thread out of the way. So I'm going to take my seam allowances, I press them both open, and I'm going to nest them together. I think you can see that in the overhead camera. Okay, I'm doing that to find the center of both sides. So I know this is the center. I'm going to actually put a pin in the center of this so I know where the center is. Now I'm going to do it again, line these back up, find the center of the other side. All right, so I have all 4 points matched. I have the centers on my sides, and of course I know where my seam allowances are the centers over here. So now you can see I have 4 points on my circle. How clever is that? So I want my burgundy to be on the outside, so I'm going to put it right sides together, pretend like my cream is my inside, and I'm going to match this point or this stitch line with this point. Take my pin out, I'm going to move it to the inside right like that. Okay, I'm not going to worry about pinning between the 2 lines right now. I'm just going to pin all 4 of my intersections. So I'm going to again line my stitch line up exactly with my seam allowance. Pin this. I thought this was going to be the really hard part, but this is actually really easy to do. I was dreading coming to this part when I was making these because I thought, oh boy, putting a circle on something like that, this is not going to be easy. But it's not a problem. Okay, I love how all 4 points line up like this. That way you know your circle is evenly distributed across the bottom. Because otherwise, I don't know how you get this right. You'd have to be marking your circle. There we go. Okay, once you have it marked, I'm just kind of taking my fingers and pushing under, and I'm just going to kind of flare this out a little bit. And I'm going to add 2 more pins between each other set of pins. Okay, let me do it again here. I'm going to pin all the way around this. And I did use pins rather than using Wonder Clips. I found that the pins held that circle where I wanted it. Wonder Clips, I was losing them. They were coming off. They were not, they just didn't hold that circle exactly like I wanted it to stay on there. So I don't want this thing to move right now. I want it to stay right there. Keep moving along. Okay, my last one here. Get this kind of situated. There we go. I'm going to show you what this looks like from the other side, because I know you're just seeing it from the top. I'm going to show you what the bottom looks like, because it really looks weird. There we go. See the bottom? So as I've gone along, I've just flattened out the bottom and made it fan out a little bit like a circle. So now the circle lays very flat on top here, and it's much easier to sew. If you're trying to pin this inside and keep it in a circle, this part in a circle, it's much more difficult to sew. So by fanning this out and pinning this, it makes this a flat surface to sew on. Now I am going to change over to a zipper foot, and I'm going to sew on the left side of my zipper foot. So I'm going to put my seam allowance, I'm going to do a 1/2 inch seam allowance, but my needle is moved over, so it's not really a 1/2 inch. All right, here we go. Okay, so you guys can see I did a 1/4 inch seam allowance around here. So my zipper foot, it's probably a little bit more than 1/4 of an inch. That looks like a real heavy 1/4 inch. But I put the needle onto the left side of the zipper foot, just on the inside of there, and sewed and just used this part of my foot as my seam allowance guide. So I was using the foot as my guide, not this plate down here where I normally am looking at the 1/4 inch mark here. On this, I was actually using the foot as a guide, so it is a little bit wider of a seam allowance around there. All right, I'm going to take out my pins. We're going to turn it right side out and see what we've got. See how we did. This is so cute. Perfect. Yep. There we go. Just like that. And that is how you make a Quilt As You Go wine tote from June Tailor. I hope you guys have enjoyed this project. I really enjoyed showing you some tips and tricks on how to get your binding on, how to do that bottom circle. It really is nothing to be afraid of. It will go right on there for you if you use the zipper foot. Hopefully you have a good time making these. We'll see you next time in Shabby Fabrics.